Good evening, everyone. Welcome to McNally Jackson. I'm so excited to see all of you here. My name is Michelle. I'm the events coordinator. And before we start tonight's event, I want all of us to give a warm round of applause to Lauren Sarand, who's the publicist who put this panel together.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I run Figment, which is an online community for teens to create their own fiction or any kind of writing. We have a community of about 100,000 teens who have created more than 225,000 pieces of writing. It is an incredibly sort of active, and you can't hear me in the back. That's better? Our community allows people to create their own unfiltered writing, and is an incredibly active and robust community in which people have an opportunity to really sort of put their work out there in a new way, find an audience, that's even better, and discover a voice online. And the idea for Figment comes from the idea of Japanese cell phone novels, which is really one of the first and most profound examples of a user-generated community really taking over an industry, and in this case, it was the publishing industry. I'll introduce our other panelists here. So, Blake Nelson is the author of 12 books, including our first published book, which is a book called Dream School. Dream School is the sequel to Girl, which was published in 1994 and Blake's first book. And it was a book that was originally serialized in Sassy magazine, and was found in the slush pile, which I just discovered very recently. We serialized Dream School on Figment when we first launched, and it was an incredibly sort of gratifying experience to watch a book get told in that fashion, and also to watch the sort of enthusiasm and excitement for something that is told serially out into a community, a free community of readers. And it was from the excitement of that we really discovered that we could publish the book. But Blake has published 12 books, including Paranoid Park, which was made into a movie by Gus Van Sant, Recovery Road. We'll leave it at that. Christopher Bollen was the editor-in-chief of... Mikki's here.
Sorry. That was really punk rock. That was really good.
Christopher Bollen was the editor-in-chief of Interview magazine, and was also the editor-in-chief of V. He's now the editor-at-large at Interview, and just published his first book, Lightning People, which was out this fall, by Soft Skull Press. Mikki, we'll get to you. Or should we let you settle in? We'll let you settle in. Jenna Wortham is a technology reporter for the New York Times, and also the co-creator of the zine Girl Crush, which just recently sold out of all of its zines. Ian Vanek. No? Vanek?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. Is one half of the band Japanther, a band often referred to as a performance art project, which has performed at the Whitney Biennial, the Venice Biennale, as well as the Williamsburg Bridge.
What's the difference between the Whitney Biennial and the Venice Biennale?
Couldn't tell you. Yeah. Isadora Schappell-Spillman is the drummer of Claire's Diary and Care Bears on Fire, which also just... someone just recorded a theme song for Rookie magazine. Which one? Claire's Diary. All right. She's also a regular contributor to Teenage, the website. Leave it at that. And Mikki. Welcome, Mikki. Mikki's a freelance writer and editor. She's written for Glamour, New York Magazine, and among others, and was the author of the book The Geek Handbook. She's one of the editors of the legendary 90s zine Ben is Dead, and my favorite, she is one of the brains behind one of the best websites in the world called Up Foodies. She's also runs the Sarah Jacobson Film Grant, which funds DIY and independent films. So since we didn't say this at the beginning, but this is called A Timely Discussion of Media Production, Distribution, and Consumption Trends of This Century and the Last from the Creator's Perspective. DIY, zines, punk rock, Gen X, and millennials in the digital age. And we'll start with a question. So, if punk rock was meant to reject the association of mainstream and the 90s culture embraced the need to critique mass media, so every generation and subculture gets a name and a particular set of cultural values, which essentially simplifies it. So, Izzy, you tell me, how would you describe your generation's cultural values?
I get that one? All right. My generation. Well, I think the most sort of significant change from the 90s culture, all the bands I've been in have been enormously influenced by the Riot Grrrl movement and the feminist sort of ideology of the 90s, but my generation, I'm 16 right now, has this amazing tool that we can use now, you know, the internet. And while Riot Grrrl was, you know, creating zines and writing letters to each other, we can now communicate so much faster. And I think that's really, really unique. Oh, no. So no one ever needs to feel that sort of isolation or... I mean, I'm a huge nerd and always feel isolated and like a freak, but I think you can have this community online that you couldn't have had at any other generation. And creation is happening so fast and young people are communicating and from all over the country. And that's a really exciting time and a really exciting generation to be a part of.
Do you know, one of the powers of the internet, obviously, is that everyone is sort of suddenly creator and consumer at the exact same time. And while that's really wonderful, it also can be very confusing. So, Ian, do you feel like it's hard to, as an artist, is it hard to find an audience out there? Is it hard to make yourself be a visible presence in the world?
And I think it's important to be invisible as an artist. I think too many people spend too much time thinking about their public persona and not enough time thinking about their work. Some of the greatest artists are discovered after they're dead, and the most interesting artists to me are the ones that have a vision of their own world, and they could give two shits if you are involved in it. If you want to get involved, that's wonderful. Some of the painters that I love, like Cy Twombly, was a horrible person, and no one liked him until after he's dead, and you say, well, here's this whole wonderful world, and you start to understand some projects long after he's dead. So I think it's important to be invisible. I wear black oftentimes to blend into the night, so that's...
Jenna, as somebody who works in traditional media and works for the Times and puts out work that people go and pay for, do you feel like you have to fight against a sort of tide of content that's being produced every day by amateurs?
That's a good question. I mean, part of what appealed, I mean, my co-editor, Thessaly Littleforce, was the founding web editor for the Paris Review and worked at the New Yorker, and we were both so steeped in the internet all the time. And I mean, when you're working in any kind of news organization, any kind of media organization, from the moment you wake up, from the moment you go to sleep, you're constantly reading the news, looking at emails, trying to make sure you're ahead of the tide or ahead of the curve. And so for both of us, it was, even though we were still using the internet, we were still very much on our laptops creating Girl Crush, it was a very intimate project because it felt like it wasn't steeped in the noise that we were sort of finding ourselves distracted by constantly throughout the day. So it was a weird, I mean, it was a strange roundabout return to something that we both felt like just creating something with our hands. It's weird because it's almost like we were talking about how it was like creating a mixtape or knitting a scarf, but we were still using the internet and computers, which says a lot about us. But you know, it felt like a very intimate handmade project, even though it was still very technically saturated. So is making a product like that kind of antithetical to the way the world has moved? I mean, do you do it purposefully to sort of counteract the fact that everyone has a voice now? No, I think we wanted to celebrate the fact that everyone, you know, that they're the barriers that would normally have existed for even traditional media companies. I mean, even me working at the Times, I was a culture blogger, and I was hired when I was 25, which was, not common. So, we wanted to accept the fact that the barriers for some things had been lowered, and that I don't know that I'll ever be published in a traditional publishing house. There are a lot of voices and other writers out there that I don't think they need to wait until they've reached a certain level of status or have achieved a certain number of things in order to be published. I felt I wanted to see what they could do if we gave them an assignment or asked them to contribute. We wanted to sort of celebrate and embrace the fact that you don't have to be a big... you don't have to work with the New York Times to publish something that's worth reading. And I think, not to diminish what we do during the day, but we also felt like there were a lot of young voices and interesting voices, and we wanted to challenge ourselves too and do a different kind of writing than we're tasked to every single day. So,
Christopher, what about from a magazine perspective? Is it hard to put content out in the world that you feel like is just distributed sort of universally, that becomes ubiquitous, accessible by everyone, as opposed to something that you're trying to sell as a commodity, or even as a book that you produce?
Well, in terms of magazines, even working at V and interviewing, I was still kind of working in a traditional magazine structure, but it was kind of untraditional in that it was independent. So I never really worked at Condé Nast or anything like that. My trick and this was before there were really that many online magazines and blogs, etc. So when I started, my trick was that of magazine editing then was that I didn't read any magazines at all anywhere else, because I actually didn't like them one bit. I couldn't stand them because I thought they were just basically PR arms. So the only way, the way I sort of built content was just through personal experiences and things that I would find out about, which is not a very expert way I know of being an editor, but it fulfilled a niche that was kind of not at all available in the larger Condé Nast publications. So in a way, I guess, as I got older and stopped going out as much, I didn't get a chance to fill so much content with people I ran into. But I guess that's where the internet has kind of taken over, and you hear things about things in new ways. I think in terms of magazines and working in a structure where advertising pays for them, advertising is still sort of in a very traditional mode of paying for what it knows and its supposed experts. So editors reap the rewards of that. That probably won't exist in 10 or 15 years. It'll be very different. But I don't assume that just because there's more access to voices doesn't mean that everyone's listening to them. I don't know. And I don't even think that many people are still reading magazines. So I'm not sure people are listening to the voices that one always was told they were.
Is it make it more difficult or less difficult to work in the context of celebrities?
Well, I don't really do the celebrity. Celebrities want to be on covers of magazines because that justifies their existence. So
me too.
I would. So actually, it's not very difficult to get a celebrity to be on a cover of a magazine. But yeah, that's just that's a part of the PR mechanism, I guess, that magazines need to rely on in order to generate advertising revenue. So
Blake, how many people here have read Girl? Lots of people. One of the amazing things about Girl I always found is just what a phenomenally observant narrator she is, and how subtle that comes across in the book. And she's not just observant about her surroundings, but she's also observant about the culture that's going on. And a lot of that has to do with the 90s, and it has to do with the Pacific Northwest. And is that, how much of that sort of culture and ethos sort of is part of Andrea Marr, the narrator of the book?
Yeah, it's a big part. It's fun. The basic story of Andrea is she's a typical suburban teenager, and then she gradually learns about local bands, local magazines, local. She sort of discovers the underworld, as it was thought of at the time, and Yeah, and it's interesting to try to think of like what that's like compared to what it's like now, and like how you found it. How did you figure out what a cool band was when you were 16 in the pre-internet era, and you heard like from your friends? Sometimes Spin magazine would stumble upon something cool, but in general, you really, as kids like in Portland, you never trusted. I hate to say it, but the New York Times was, if they liked it, you didn't like it. If they didn't like it, you did like it. It was, and Rolling Stone was always famously clueless, and Spin magazine had the appearance of being cool, and then after a while, everybody realized that it wasn't. And you would and I remember when I was in bands myself, you'd go to a town and some kid would be hanging around the club like before the doors opened, and he'd say, "Oh, you should have seen this band. There's this band from L.A. and they stripped naked and they wore socks on their dicks." And and that turned out to be the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and you would just hear, and like the meme idea, it was like little germs of when REM first broke. I remember I was like a teenager, and I was like, "There's this band from back east," and there, like people didn't even know where they were from exactly, and. But it would just be the light in people's eyes. Like that's actually how you learned about what was cool. Was like if the cool guy in your scene got excited about something, that was the cool thing. And you never listened to media. I never did, and my friends never did. And it was all just word of mouth and passed along. And then little zines. There was a New York Rocker and L.A. Slash were the two magazines that people trusted. And I think it's probably the same now. I don't think it really changes that much, but the availability of information seems to me just more sort of noise. But the thing I love about the internet, I like to go on Tumblrs and look at what teenagers, just what images they like, and I'm totally addicted to it. I love trying to just imagine who they are as people based on like what sunsets they like and what little quotes from some terrible TV show or something like that. So
do sort of changing aesthetics or changing habits or changing politics, does that make it difficult to continue to write in the voice of a teenager? It may be a shock to most people, but you're not a teenager.
Right. The thing is, I don't, I don't think the aesthetics have changed that much. I relate to I can tell who the cool kids are by the pictures they pick. And it just confirms to me, okay, I haven't lost it yet. I still have a sense for it, and hopefully I won't lose that. But I don't think the aesthetics do change, and it's fun to watch the aesthetics change. It's fun to watch. When I was a kid, big glasses were cool. Then the glasses got smaller and smaller and smaller, and now they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now all the cool girls have like huge glasses that have no lenses in them, and and it's I really enjoy watching it. I'm endlessly. I always mention this when people ask me. I just am endlessly fascinated by teen fashion and teen whatever, and I don't ever lose my taste for it.
I always thought the sort of idea, there was sort of an apocryphal idea of people would have manuscripts buried under their bed or in their drawer, but Dream School, the book that was just published, which is a sequel to Girl, actually was buried in Blake's drawer. Where was it, in your desk or underneath?
It's actually on my computer.
Yeah, modern age. Is publishing a book that's been sitting around for so long difficult, just in trying to understand the character and trying to release her out into the world?
Yeah, it was a little weird. I was surprised how it worked. It was fine when I dug it out of the drawer. And what I would do was, originally I tried to get my publisher to publish it, and they weren't that receptive to it. But I would get emails. People would email me and say, they're supposed to, because the ending of Girl suggests a sequel. And I would get emails from girls. They would say, please, where's the sequel? How come I can't find the sequel? Is it published or whatever? And I would just cut and paste the book and put it in the email and send it back to them. and which I always thought was so cool and so interesting. Like, I would love it if someone would do that to me, and I would just get these incomprehension back. Like, they would just be so shocked. They wouldn't believe it was me. They would think it was a fake. I don't know. But it was. I once had a guy write to me and say, "My girlfriend only wants one thing in the world: a sequel to Girl." And is there one? I don't know anything about you. I don't know about your book. Is there a sequel somewhere? Can you give it to me? So I cut and pasted it, sent it to him, and I was like, "You better get some. You better get something for this."
Nikki, was the '90s kind of DIY culture? Was it a cultural movement or a political movement?
I mean, I don't know if there's that much of a difference between a cultural movement and a political movement. I think one thing that I was thinking about today when I was thinking about DIY, and it's sort of connected to what Ian said, is, a big part of it is about defining success for yourself. I mean, it's not that, when I was editing the music reviews at Benestead, I would never let anyone say, like, they're so good they should be on a major label, because I just thought that is just not how we're going to define what's good, and I think it works at all kinds of levels. I think with feminism, it's a movement, a cultural and political movement that I'm very involved with, and I think right now it's really going through a lot of things where it's trying to figure out what success is, and it's like, I think we all have to, cultural workers, you have to kind of think about it that way. It's like, is it about me getting into New York Magazine, or is it about my ideas getting across? I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I thought about that all day and I really wanted to say it.
Do you feel like there is the same kind of either political or cultural aspirations today? Do you feel like people who are doing DIY are producing content, and in that case, it could be everybody, or it could be a specific sort of segment of people who are producing content? Are they doing it with kind of political aspirations or sort of real idealistic changes in mind?
Besides the people on this panel.
Besides these people, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people, want to connect with one another, and they create media to do that, and whether that they do it because they want to reach out to, I brought one of my favorite pieces of DIY media, which is the Coin Laundry newsletter, which is just for owners of Coin Laundry. And I think it's totally amazing that, like, their community puts out this newsletter and they all, like, know each other and they have a letter section and the whole thing. So, I mean, that is a movement in a way, and they're connecting, and obviously big mainstream media was not serving them. And so, I don't know. I don't know if I can speak for the country and say, yes, there are cultural people out there doing things that I approve of, but I think so, yeah.
Do you feel like the internet holds some kind of promise for social change?
I don't think it holds any more promise than anything else. I mean, in the 90s, everyone was like, desktop publishing, oh my God, and that didn't, I think shockingly, it still seems to be straight white men who get to the top on the internet and everything else. So to me, it's not that. It's great. I don't think it has the promise of any kind of social change any more than anything else.
Ian, this is a question for you. Since you're playing music in front of people and there are a lot of restrictions at shows, what's the importance of an all-ages show?
There's no restrictions in the entire world. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to fly to the top of the Empire State Building, I could. I just have to think about it. I think it's also important to talk about DIY as a big mistake. It's DIY, do yourself in. If you're if you're doing things on your own, you're failing. I think that Matt and I, my group, we work with tons of people. We work with Lauren Saran. We work with Izzy. We work with a lot of people. And you're going to have to remind me of the question. Say it again? All ages culture. Oh, when I was 9 years old, I played my first concert, and that would be 1989, I guess, with my brother, who's an older guy. So I think it's really important to talk to people who are in middle school, and we're focusing on teenage. Teenagers are boring because they already have an opinion. What we need to do is talk to 6th graders and 7th graders and say, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if you were cool instead of being a dick? Wouldn't it be cool if you did exactly what you wanted instead of listening to your peers and smoking cigarettes and smoking pot and drinking alcohol? If that's what you want to do, great. But wouldn't it be great if you thought for yourself? And my friend Scott, who runs a space called the Trailer Space in Austin, Texas, where a lot of all ages shows happen. It's a record store, but during South by Southwest, it's basically a whorehouse. He has, a billion bands come through. It's really important to him to talk to middle schoolers. And Scott was a person who ran a record store in Washington State when I was a young kid. And he reached us with shows like The Nation of Ulysses, Carp, Unwound, amazing underground bands when I was still 10 and 11 and 12 years old. And he still believes that if I reach middle school kids and that age, it's more important because they don't have an opinion yet. So that's my opinion on all ages, is that you reach people in a developmental stage and you say, hey, think about all these things, not just peer pressure and not just high school and being a teenager and how important it is to be a teenager because everyone is kissing your ass because you're the next market branding thing. So it's important for me to reach all ages. So like an 80-year-old would come up to you and say, I love what you do. It's honest. It's beautiful. A 10-year-old would come up and say, I don't know how to express this, but I'm into what you're doing. So all ages, meaning 80 and 5 or 2. Or we have fans of our group that are 4 and 5 years old. They're like, actually, we have a fan of our group that's 2 years old, little Bobby Cruz in California. So it's these people, they shake their butt to music. There's no denying that pounds in your soul. Since you're a little kid, your heart beats, and then you hear a beat and you say, oh, cool, this is me. Whether that's hip hop, punk rock, anything. We're focusing too much on punk. There's a lot of different cultures. Like you said, the coin-op laundry is a great example of. I've always loved like tabloid design or layout, or even the fruit section of the at the grocery store. How that's laid out. The guy sits on his computer and says, "Okay, cucumbers are gonna go here." And that to me is really exciting. Media and design and making your own media was. I'm really excited to be here because that idea of. It's across the board, and being in a place like this with published people, it's like being at a graveyard because all these people have made it, success is like, I don't like your book. I like Guns N' Roses.
Wait, isn't Playing All Ages show also about opting out of being about selling alcohol? Or is that?
No, not necessarily, because the best all ages shows have an illegal bar.
True.
Yeah, that's my opinion. You have to have a person there with a drink. That's part of rock and roll music, cigarettes and drinking, or it's become ingrained. Not for me, I don't smoke or drink, but it doesn't matter.
You nodded your head very knowingly when he said teenagers are boring. Why are teenagers boring?
Well, I was just thinking about, I started my first band when I was 8, and a lot of adults and figures were just laughing and being like, that's ridiculous. But I think what's so incredible about all ages shows and having these tools is telling young kids that they can create, that there's no age limit. There's no time when you become a creative person. There's not a point where you're suddenly ready to make art. I think it's really important to tell kids, as Ian was saying, like middle school, younger, that they have the tools and they are creative and they have a voice that really needs to be heard. And I think the reason teenagers can be boring is because we get deluded into the idea that Naomi Wolf was talking about this really interesting idea in one of her interviews, the idea of the phantom, as someone else is creating the art, like you have an idea, but there's the phantom who's already done it. So I think teenagers get into the idea like, oh, all the good art, all the good ideas are out there. People have created what's important, so I will simply be a consumer and not a creator. And a lot of products are marketed towards us. I'm fascinated by like teenage media or like mainstream magazines geared towards teenagers, because I think it lulls teens, whatever we are classifying as teens, into just complacency and feeling like, oh, well, if I do all this, then I will be cool or I will be popular, and I don't need to, add anything to this world. Do people your age look back at sort of 90s DIY culture or even punk culture in a way that sort of infuses what they do now about creating art? Is it a present idea? I think it's relevant in terms of people drawing inspiration from it, but I think the time has changed to the point where it's a relevant idea, but there's so many other social movements and so many current political and cultural phenomenons going on right now that we're not drawing so much on the past, and it's really about looking to the future. And
obviously playing an all ages show for you has a slightly different meaning. How do you even go about sort of finding venues, finding an audience, finding a kind of a platform to get your music out there?
I think it's really important to not be focused on traditional sort of routes to creating music. I know this is something Japanther has worked a lot with, not necessarily going with a big major label and producing the music yourself. Because, I mean, you can be 8, you can be 80, and you can put music out yourself. You don't need a label. You don't need executives, trying to change your music or your message. So I think really going from the place of creating your music yourself, and then people are generally really receptive, and the community of young people online and even just proximity can get shows. And I think going against sort of traditional venues is really great. There are a lot of feminist spaces and a lot of, houses that will have all ages events, because clubs will often do, 21 plus shows because they want to serve legal alcohol and to make money. And I think you get a group of people who are all there for the music and not there to make money, and it changes.
Christopher, so as someone who just published a book, have you made it?
Well, first I just want to say that I find out it's weird that all these conversations always end up being about teenagers, because I just feel like people always just assume that if it's new technology, teenagers know it better. But I'm actually more concerned about my own age group, which is 30-somethings and older, and how we're going to continue to grow. No offense to you as a teenager. Have I made it? I've achieved some sort of dream I wanted to, but it's just a sort of passage of life. I don't really believe in that. So I no, that's a weird question for me.
Do you feel your age group? Do you use technology effectively to make art? I think it's really interesting. I'm 36, so I'm of this generation that didn't have the internet until my senior year of college. So I effectively grew up without that influence at all. And I think I'm so thankful for that experience. I don't think I would at all want to be a writer today if I grew up with the internet. It was the sort of loneliness of living in an isolated place without that such easy contact that made me want to go places and write about things. But I use it. I use it maybe too much to look things up as a crutch, but I don't think it is an imaginative, a source of great imagination for me. Do you use it as a marketing platform for the work that you put out there? I mean, is it? Yeah, I mean, that's what Facebook has become. I feel like when I joined Facebook, it was a small group of friends, and then everyone has become their own PR hack, and it's just a series of self-promotional messages. So yeah, I used it to get the book out there as much as I could, unabashedly. But I'd rarely use it for the initial impulse of joining, right, which was to, I guess, make friends that I didn't really know I wanted. What about to do something creative? I mean, do you ever use a platform like that to write something that you might hope to publish one day, or even that you want to try out with an audience? I'd love to. Thanks. Yeah. No, I haven't. No, I haven't done it. But I really don't. I find my creative. I think that's where I differ so much from music, is that I don't really. I try to sort of aggressively not seek any opinions on what I write until I'm absolutely finished with it. So maybe it would be nice to open it up to other people, but I'm actually scared. Music, it goes faster or something. Jenna, are there, as someone who reports on technology, are there things that you see that come out in technology that you sort of look at as having a really profound effect on sort of expressive culture?
Sure. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, we were really inspired by Kickstarter. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kickstarter. It's a platform where you can kind of toss out an idea and say, would people support this and back this? And if enough people say yes, then it happens. And we were sort of, because we ended up kind of funding Girl Crush ourselves, and so we sort of we set up a pre-order, and we sort of had everything done, and we were like, will people order this? Because it wasn't at all a for-profit venture, but we also we wanted to be able to pay our rent and still publish the zine. So, but we had enough interest, and that in itself turned into, an interesting, I guess, marketing tool, because people heard about it and then were said, oh, you should order this thing too. And so that helped us. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I mean, that kind of helped us use tech in a different way to sort of get this idea around and sort of field test it before we did it. And because we wanted it to be something big. Like originally we were sort of like, oh, we'll just sort of print it at work, and then it kept getting bigger. And but so, I mean, sure, I think there are all kinds of ways to use technology for, I'm trying to think of like a really specific example. I don't know if there is one, but I just think in general, even though, yeah, Facebook sucks, but at the same time, just posting something quick on, a status update or a quick tweet on Twitter, all of those things really just can add up, and they can snowball, and they can really help put weight behind something or expose something to people that wouldn't have seen it otherwise, which I think is really important, whether it's, a new album or a band or something, just like to help raise awareness about something. I mean, I do feel like it's weird, but I do feel like I find out about a lot of interesting things now because of Tumblr and Twitter, and just even paying attention to something, or even a new shade of pink. I just see stuff and I'm like, what is that? I'm going to save that and collect it and find it later, and it helps me, yeah.
Is its ubiquity? I mean, do you look at sort of technology that helps sort of in which people are expressive? Has it reached its limit? I mean, if we all have a voice and we're all able to say everything that's on our mind or be expressive or creative in any way that we want put out in the world, at some point it just becomes oversaturated. Do you see that, or do you feel like it's infinite and can go on forever?
I would like to think that it's infinite and it can go on forever, but I think, I think we get really kind of caught up in seeing what other people are. I mean, it's sort of the boon and also a weird hindrance of the internet. It's that you get so caught up with, you mentioned this earlier, creating that, or I mean, consuming. We're not thinking about creating. And I have mornings where I spend 2 hours reading everything on the internet, and then I just feel exhausted and I can't look at anything. It's like I have no willpower left to create, so that's, to me, I worry about that, because I do think there is sort of a weird dampening effect that happens when you get so steeped, and bogged down by kind of trying to cram everything into your brain that's happening on the internet, that you kind of forget that you want to create stuff as well, whether it's online or offline. So I do worry about that. However, I do think I love the internet. Like I actually love it. And if I were in a romantic comedy, it would be called like Must Love Internet, for my one and only. But I do see sometimes some of the most creative and interesting things appear on the internet, whether it's in a subboard of Reddit or in a rapidly evolving joke meme on Tumblr. I mean, I think we saw that with the Occupy cop. People probably saw this when the video emerged of the cop pepper spraying the kids, and then it got quickly turned into a meme, and people started, applying it to all these different things, and we were talking about it in house about whether or not, is this sort of a valid, I mean, are people understanding where this comes from, or this origin? I mean, is this a valid way to make use of this really important piece of media content? It's totally out of context. And then ultimately I told myself this, I don't know if it's true, but I sort of said, I hope that what's happening here is that this sort of new creative expression of something that is terrible gets people thinking, well, what is this, and where is this from, and where did this start? And I think that's really important, and it's good. I don't know, I do think there is the ability for things to evolve and mutate and morph on the internet in a way that makes us ask important cultural questions and important creative questions. It's just difficult to sort it out because there is so much stuff, if that makes sense.
Mikki, can I ask you about Shut Up Foodies? Is it appropriate to describe it as a joke about foodie culture? Or does that not even do it justice?
My partner does not want to be identified. Shut Up Foodies.
I heart your website.
Like many things that I do, was motivated by spite. And we were very tired of getting the life story of everything on the menu when we went shopping and hearing people talk about food. And their spices and this, that, and the other, and their chickens and all of those ramps and things like that. And, so there was sort of that just general level of meanness. And then also feeling like, it's such a completely grotesquely privileged discourse for the most part. And there's, very little attention paid to the conditions of workers and to the fact that, many people don't have access to good food. And it's not like, do you not know about whole grains? Like, it's not, it's not like, there's just so many things out there. Plus, the more we read food blogs, the more enraged we became about various disgusting, sexist and other things. So there was endless fodder. We did it a lot for a few years. And, one of the reasons we stopped doing it, besides getting jobs, was that people really wanted to make it about us. Like, we were getting, interviewed, and they, really wanted photos of us, and they really wanted to know, like, what's in your fridge and who's your favorite chef and all these things. And we were like, it's so not about like us becoming media stars, this is the reason we used pseudonyms was because it was funny, but also we just didn't, it was not like to try and get a book deal called Shut Up Foodies, and so it became very weird to be in that space and have all this attention being paid to us, whereas we really felt like that, why could people maybe talk about this other stuff that we've been writing about, admittedly hilariously, but also seriously, the end.
You should check it out. A number of you guys make zines and have made some for this panel tonight, which everyone should check out. So Mikki, when you make a site like that, or you decide to make a zine about something else, what's the difference in the medium, and why make that choice? If you have this incredible tool at the internet at your disposal and you can just put it out there and find an audience, why go what is essentially backwards and print something and bind it and put it out into the world?
Shut Up Foodies, I think because food culture basically exists on the internet, it made sense. Mm-hmm. Some of my other internet things, I have a website about how much I hate Bret Easton Ellis. That seemed good to be on Tumblr. And, it's called Beasting, Besting. But I think, I love zines and I love the tactile quality of it. And I'm super old, and I remember buying records through mail order from Alternative Tentacles, and they would come with stickers inside and like all this stuff. And it was amazing. And, I think that is fantastic. And it is almost, it is a little, well, this is totally pretentious, but I'll say it anyway. It is sort of a forced interruption. You can't really, really multitask and read something at the same time for the most part, versus it being a window on someone's screen. And I think, being able to hand it to someone and be like, I made this is totally powerful and cool. And I think also, for teenagers that I've worked with, and a couple of projects for HIV positive kids and things like that, like for them, what they've told me is that like for them, zines is a really efficient mode of propaganda, because teenagers have zero civil rights. Like, their parents can read their websites, their teachers can read their websites, everyone can read their web histories, but it's like if they have a zine, they can fold it up, they can sneak it around, they can hand it to each other, you can pick it up and read it, no one knows you have it. So there's also that aspect to it. I think you can be a lot sneakier with a zine in a lot of ways, which I like.
Ian, what about you?
I totally agree with what Mikki just said. I remember being like a little kid and getting magazines from older kids in Seattle when we would go visit, and they were filled with their spray paint and their tags and their markings. This is completely unavailable online, and this is something, like you said, something very sneaky. And my parents were really pissed off. It was hidden under my bed, and they weren't acknowledging it, so it was really a beautiful thing. I think that creating zines is something I've done since I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12 as just a non sequitur. It's something you have to do because there's Time Magazine, there's Spin Magazine, there's everything you mentioned. None of those publishers are you. They're not your soul. And if you want to, you spit it out on a page, you go to the photocopy place, and then Kinko's used to have these things, and you would put it in halfway and you get free copies. And then you go back to your house and you figure out a cool way to bind it, and then you spray paint it a little bit and do some, I've gotten into printmaking because of zines, and using Vandercook letterpresses and all these ideas of our country's founded on something called common sense. And this guy published a pamphlet, which was, oh my God, it's a zine. It was a drunk, you know, a total fuck up. But he was the one that made the common person in our country fiery enough to say, the British got to get the fuck out of here, like these guys are dicks. Common sense. And it was a zine. Excuse me?
And spite.
And spite. Focus. And the catalyst was spite. And I think that that's really beautiful, and that's still happening today. The most important ideas are ideas that you cannot get on the internet ever, and they won't exist there. Tumblr is still owned by a major corporation, and if you have something dirty on there, something that they don't want to hear, oh, my website disappeared. That's really strange. Facebook, the same thing. Anything, the same thing. But a zine and a photocopy, the Kinko's doesn't care what you do, and even then, I have a zine in my collection. I brought a lot of zines, and you're welcome to peruse them on this table. We made one that has no printmaking, no computer involved. It was all stamps and handwritten, and I really like that. Those ideas, it's creating something that wouldn't otherwise be created, and giving birth to an idea that is super important, like common sense. It's to me.
Blake, what for someone who's published books and worked in magazines before that? Blake worked at Details magazine in the 90s. Having this book, Dream School, serialized online over a period of time and sort of seeing it put out into the world and then turning that into a physical product, what was that experience like?
It was great. It was great. It was interesting to have the basic pattern be the same. Girl, I couldn't get Girl published, and then I got the people at Sassy. I sent it to Christina Kelly at Sassy, and she kind of jumped right on it, and then that base, and then it came out, and they call it a platform, I guess now, but you get this base of an audience, and then to do the exact same thing at Figment, to kind of test the waters, put it out there, see what the numbers are, sort of kind of start the buzz.
I will remind you though that I called Blake after a week and I said, "This is how many people read the story," and he said, "No, don't tell me. I don't want to know at all." So you never did know the numbers.
It's true, yeah. I never want to hear the numbers. Well, in publishing, you never want to hear the numbers. It's too depressing. But yeah, it was fun, and what's ironic is, and then when the actual paper book came out, it was all the usual suspects. Jane ran a thing, Rookie ran a thing, Teenage Site ran a thing. It was almost a recreation of what we did with getting Sassy to do it, and that's why. To me, the game hasn't really changed that much. It's really like when you do a book. And I've learned this from just being in publishing forever, is you have to go out there and scrap around and talk somebody into writing about it, and the media, and in the Girl day, Sassy, Spin, there was a handful of outlets that would actually have enough of an audience to actually make your book sell, and it's just the same. It seems like it's the same now. And I noticed, and then you think like, well, word of mouth works better now with the internet, but there's, you get so much crap. Like if you're a music fan, how many times have I fallen for the thing where I read about some band in 3 different blogs, oh, they must be hot, I get the record, it's horrible. And so, and then and it happens with books too, like the average idiot with a blog, you can't trust them. I don't. I have to, like that's the thing with Tumblr is you look at 1,000 Tumblrs and you figure out 10 of them that you like, and then you can always go back to them, which is not that different than showing up at a club. When I was a long time ago when I was in bands, you just have to know who you're going to listen to, and so I don't know that the internet hasn't changed that at all for me. And then the thing of I just knew I had to get in Rookie and I had to get in XO Jane because I knew that all the grown-up girl fans, that's where they are, or the young girl fans, and so it really isn't any different than I knew after I wrote Girl and I couldn't get it published. I knew I had to get to Sassy. That was they were the one spot that would actually make a difference or move the needle, as they say. So in a way, I love the internet too, and I I obsess over it and I just do it endlessly. But I don't really trust it. It's I hate to say it, it's the rabble, it's the masses, and they fall for stuff. Like no offense to some of my fellow writers, but books are big that I think are shit, and books that are great don't get any play. And you just have to. And then the other thing I wanted to say was Proust famously was supposedly such a recluse.
Huge on the internet.
But the great story about him was he did just what I did with Girl. He figured out the one or two people that could help him, and he weaseled his way to them and got them behind his book, and then things started to roll. So I think it's always you got to be a little you got to use some back alleys, I guess, to get to the people that can actually make something happen. And also the really smart people that make taste, like people that just read other people's blogs. Like we all live in New York and we all have blogs, but people in Portland and Omaha and Oklahoma City, they just read blogs. They can't figure out how to make a blog or how to, I don't mean that critically, but I just mean that, they look at it, they don't make it. And we're all smart people that somehow survive in New York City, and so what am I trying to say here?
Izzy, we're gonna pass the mic this way. Someone who will be nameless today referred to sort of big publishing this was on the Facebook page for this event. I think it's Mick Publishing.
They're making millions.
Yes, they are making millions. Do you, as someone who's out there creating music and creating art, do you look at sort of mass media and big publishing and big production houses as the enemy or as the kind of goal?
Well, when I was younger, I was on a major label with my first band, and we released 2 albums on a major label. And it was an incredibly formative experience and really amazing to have that level of exposure and get to have these experiences that not many 8-year-olds have. But I think it really soured me on the entire idea of success in the music industry, because I just felt so commodified and objectified as a young woman trying to be a musician or try and be a successful young musician. And it really made me not want to work with major labels. Not that they're the enemy. I think great music has been made on major labels and great books come out of big publishing houses. But for me personally, I just felt that my voice was being obscured and that I couldn't really keep my art and my voice pure in this sort of form where there were so many other people involved in the art. And I think the enemy is really strong, but perhaps someone I would avoid, Does
that mean a lifetime of creating underground music?
I don't know. Maybe in the future, major labels will get really cool and start listening to us. But I don't know. I think it's really hard to say. I think right now, to me, it's much more important to be in a local community or to be in a community of underground musicians. All
right. Well, that's great. Thank you guys very much for participating in the panel, and thank you everyone for coming. And Christopher and Blake will be signing copies of their books right over here, and we would love for everyone to buy a copy and get it signed. And you can check out everyone's zines that they made over here as well. And thank you very much.